So up next, we have attorney Èzili Dantò. She is an internationally recognized human rights attorney, award-winning playwright, performance poet, and cultural activist. She's a master Asian voodoo dance instructor and choreographer. She specializes in promoting Black empowerment, liberation, history, and self-determination, and rejects profit over people values, the corporatocracy of corporations having rights, more rights than human beings. She was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and was raised in the United States. And in the essence of time, I am going to end here. She has numerous publications and numerous, she's a social commentator, political activist in her rights. She has represented numerous of entertainment individuals in Grammy Award artists, hip hop artists, and also she's been seen in major media posts on international human rights issues. So I will now turn it over to Attorney Èzili Dantò. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Please unmute your mic.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Hello?
Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Very good. Thank you so very much for the invitation, the generous invitation. I say honor and respect to your entire audience in the name of all that we don't see, all that is greater than we, and all the women from the Haitian Revolution that we try to give voice to at the Èzili network. I work within the tragic journey of the Haitians, both in the US and abroad, who struggle to define self outside of the negative images that the former colonists and enslavers, the former enslavers, have given Haiti because we were the first to put liberty into application in the Western Hemisphere after the genocidal 1492 bringers of doom vampire society had begun. So my work, since my theme is about how do I issue within the context of leadership, strategy, power, and representation. What is leadership, strategy, power, and representation for the Èzili network, for the Haitian Lawyers Leadership Network, and for ZiliD, which is a project that we do in Haiti for clean water, skills transfer, and solar power for everyone? How do we, what are my experiences in these realms? In terms of strategy, I only issue from the source of the ancestors. So my work starts with my name. My name is Èzili Dantò, and I give voice to the archetype of the Great Mother. Our culture is our sword. When the Haitian Revolution started on August 14, 1791, our DNA, which had been destroyed and brainwashed and by the Najoki, by the various activities of the colonizers, and our inability to remember who we were, was activated on August 14, 1791. And it was activated by calling on the Great Mother, and her name is Èzili Dantò. The reason that I think hopefully people will remember me is that after the Haitian Revolution, the legend was that Èzili Dantò's tongue was cut out. So if you if you speak to Vodouists in Haiti, the strangest thing in the world is they will tell you that Èzili Dantò was the archetype that quickened a woman out of King Congo, a follower of Queen Nzinga, to bring her power and help quicken the folks who had been zombified to take up arms and liberate themselves. But then somewhere along the line, we learn, at least I learned when I was growing up, that that archetype, that metaphor, that activated DNA, somehow her tongue was cut out. My story starts there. My father is a Negine. He always said that, which means he's an outsider to the European positions of power. He only issues from ancient source. And as that, he would always say that. And I was always wondering as a child what exactly that meant. And my journey is to kind of explain how I learned to live within that paradigm as opposed to the European so-called civilization paradigm. So my work at the Èzili network, which I created to give a platform and voice to Haitian women and women as the mothers of the universe. And so we start there in that cosmic galactical space. And it is from there that I issue as a lawyer, as a writer, and as a poet. Every work that I've ever done at some point will end up on stage because that is the medium through which I express a voice that is not out there about who we are and what we are. So I give voice to the Great Mother. The historical Èzili Dantò came on quicken a woman who was a mambo, and she began. She officiated with Boukman, who came out of Jamaica, the beginning of the Haitian Revolution, and after 13 years of war, my ancestors put liberty into application. What was the template, strategy, analysis that they left that we bring forth? That template on August 14th, which I always say, was in the Kinkongo language, and it was Ee Mabumba, Kanga Mandele, Kanga Bafioti, Kanga Najoki, Kanga Yo, and it means that we must get rid of the colonists, their Black collaborators, and all their evil forces. That is my template at the Free Haiti movement. That is my template in everything that we do. But with every template, it has to be applicable. So how do we apply it? Mandela is the colonist. I was just reviewing Discourse on Colonialism, which this organization did a webinar on. And I must say that it hasn't changed. Colonialism, whether it's neo-colonialism with a Black face or direct colonialism, the template remains the same. And so the warriors at Bois-Caïman knew that template, and they left us, their descendants, with how to beat white supremacy. And so that's what we bring to the table. We bring to the table the template of the Haitian Revolution, and we give it life at the Èzili network. We give it voice. What are our obstacles? So when we say Kunga Mandele, which means stop, kill, get rid of, move out of your way, the colonists, the profit over people system of the colonists. How do we do that at the Free Haiti movement? How do we push that forward? Um, and how do we talk about those Black collaborators? Well, and then what are the evil forces? Their evil forces are the exact same forces that my ancestors, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Christophe, and the women of the Haitian Revolution, Grand Guiton, Grand Toya, Défilé, I named their names. You can find all this information. I have a body of work out there um, with the women of the Haitian Revolution. And also, so this is the way we go through this. Najoki, which is their evil forces, are their education, their media, their economy, their human rights organization, their Bretton Woods UN organization, all of it, as Dr. Henry Clark says, everything that the white man has ever taught about is about domination. You all who have not ever experienced my work will now be thinking, how radical is that? But this is the only way, the only template that has beaten white supremacy. So our job is to understand not only what the template was, but then why it failed. That goes beyond the parameters of this presentation, but I urge all of you who are interested, every year we issue forth with these templates through 6 teach-ins that I've been doing for 16 years, since 2004, when the European came back and put his foot on Haiti as a master. Dessalines' law, Dessalines is Haiti's founding father, not Toussaint Louverture. We teach all of these things to lift up the voice of Dantò, which is a representation of the women warriors who fought at the Haitian Revolution. And then we know more about the men, so we can actually give them names. Jean-Jacques Dessalines is Haiti's founding father. Toussaint Louverture was already dead when Haiti was founded. But the European will always bring up, and the scholars will always talk about Toussaint Louverture, because Toussaint Louverture was about creating what we have now. He wanted to get rid of slavery, but he wanted to be a colony of France. So all over the Caribbean, the template is Black ruled colony of the European. And that's Toussaint Louverture's template. And that is not what we are about at Free Haiti. We are about Dessalines' template, which is Black rule independent nation. Now, that's the leadership we follow. We follow the leadership of the women of the Haitian Revolution who took up arms, women like Grand Toya, who was the woman who taught Jean-Jacques Dessalines how to fight when he was a teenager in slavery. That's a story you will find. Professor Baena Bello tells that story. I urge all of you who don't know that story to find it. So women have no problem with looking for feminism. I mean, that stuff is not part of my narrative. I lead the Free Haiti movement. My name is Èzili Dantò. I bring forth the work of the women of the Haitian Revolution. We did not only take up arms, we also trained the warriors, just like the Dahomean, our Dahomean ancestors in Africa. And just like, this is December, just like Anna Kawona, the indigenous queen who is in Haiti, who faced the rapists and pedophiles of Jean-Jacques, of Columbus on a December day long ago. And she fought him and his rapists after they had killed her brother, and I say his name, of course, Kaunabo, Hatre. These are folks, Haiti is the first place that they brought to the New World their barbarity. And Haiti's the first place that takes it out. That's our leadership, and our strategy is based on what was left behind for us. One of the ways of the Haitian Revolution was to create confusion within the white society and white power structure. And we're very happy to do that. I find that most of the people calling themselves advocates, they want comfort. They want to work within the UN. The UN is the greatest perpetrator of colonialism there is. It was created for that. It is where you have 194 or so nations being ruled by 5 Eurasian powers. That Jean-Jacques Dessalines, our founding father, and that the women of the Haitian Revolution would not find at all to be democratic at all. And so when the UN is taken down, and it will be, somebody will say Èzili Dantò's name, because that's what we live for. That's our strategy. The Europeans' way of implementing colonialism, like I said, hasn't changed since, Frantz Fanon and Aimé Césaire defined it: the degraded masses, the collaborating local elites, who they use as middlemen. It's all over the Caribbean. The problem is we keep believing their deceit and entering their system. I don't do that at the Èzili Network. We sue the UN, for instance. They were in Haiti from 2004 to just recently, a couple of years ago. They left tens of thousands of Haitian children. They call them the minister babies, because they raped the women. And I am the lawyer who, because I can't go to court, because someone like a collaborator like Obama would come into court and say the UN, because their laws is another Njoki, right? Their laws are there to maintain their system. And as a lawyer, I say that because I know that is the truth, right? The U.S. Constitution, the U.S. The U.S. Constitution and the Supreme Court are the greatest perpetrators and of the system of white supremacy, right? Because they work on precedent. And what is precedent but that my ancestors were 3/5 human, and that's what it is. And they're there to maintain that. As a lawyer, I'm not there to maintain that. I am there to push the laws of my ancestors. And those laws come from theories and cosmic, universal ways of being that you will never hear about, but I will give you some of those things. They're Lakou, Vive, Combit, Guinée Franc. What do Lakou means? Most Africans live in community. In Haiti, there's tons of Lakous where the family members live on a plot of land. 60 to 70% of Haitians are farmers, and mostly women. We are the Madame Sarah is the name. They're the economic backbone of the country. However, their children go to school and get PhDs and never count the economics, the informal economics of the women and men of the informal economy, not only in Haiti, but all over the world. So if you're not going to count the fact that you actually have these lands, which you won in war after 300, then what are you doing as an economist? So you will see that the World Bank will constantly say that Haiti is living off of $1 a day. If Haitians were living off $1 a day, we'll all be dead. There's 13 million Haitians. You must live off of your land your space, your laku. Vivre is a concept of living together with your fellow human being and allow them to live. It literally means vivre. So there's no profit over people in our system. The problem is we have no self-reliance. We are dependent on the system of white supremacy. And so our children go to school, learn everything that has nothing to do with their reality, and then are brainwashed by the media to have positions in politics where they are the problem. These positions are not of power. And I'll give you an example in terms of my experience in my community realm with leadership. I was born in Haiti during the Duvalier regime. My father was forced to go to the United States and raise his children there. I went back as the lawyer for the first democratically elected president of Haiti, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, 1994. It is there that I learned that a politician in the Caribbean has absolutely no power unless given by the white supremacy. So because Aristide represented the masses and he did not represent the World Bank and its idea of export economy where they make you a sweatshop and take out all your resources and leave you with nothing, his power of election was degraded by the fact that he had no economy and no military to sustain it. So I always ask people, what are these nations that have no power? And why get into these systems? We work outside the system. That's because of my experience with power and leadership. In terms of representation, what is representation? I have had to fight to have a voice because the people who represent Haiti are normally what I call the white saviors. And those white saviors, they're looking for a token Negro. Well, I'm descendant of Ned Guinée and the Haitian Revolution. I don't need the token to be a token to anybody. So it's been very, very difficult to face, to me, the greatest enemy that I faced have been the white liberals, not the outright racists. The white liberals always bring tangential issues to the fore. They're talking about LGBT, they're talking about feminism, they want to have sex with Black people, they want to feel good, they want their image to not be what they are, so they are the greatest deceivers. So I'm always talking about the wolf and the fox, right? So the white liberals, as Malcolm X says, are the fox. And then you have the wolves. At the end of the day, it's the same system. They just play each other and you're the prey. But I find that my people are very simple-minded. Some of them is because of the fact that they're living so much trauma. They don't have really the time to understand the game that's being played. And so it's up to us who do eat every day, whose parents worked to get us to this point. We have a duty and a responsibility to face both the fox and the wolf and create outside of their system of hero villain. I don't think that many of us have gotten there. So sometimes the Èzili network stands alone. We, for instance, in this last election, our people I'll give you an example of how I use Haitian history to teach lessons. There, and I just talked about Vertier, which is in my last webinar, which was November 18th. And like I said, I'm just going through some of these very quickly, but if you really want to know what our work is about, you can check our webinars. You can check our 30 years of work, which is out here. But digital colonialism is real. The European not only censors our work, but they will take us out. They will take our work out. And that's why I work on multiple disciplines, not only a lawyer who will ask people to sign a petition so that the soldiers that left Haiti with all these children, they call them minister babies, will provide support for those children. We have to go outside of the law in order to push those things. So we find ourselves in positions where we have to create different strategies to meet the current scenario. And so, for instance, when the UN brought cholera to Haiti, which killed 30,000 Haitians after during the reign of Obama and Biden, that's when I created ZiliD Low Clean Water Solar Power for Haiti. Okay. And that's when I went to the market women of Haiti and sent 4 market women in a program to learn how to, they were illiterate women in terms of education, Western education, but they had PhDs in survival and common sense and how to get their kids to school and provide with nothing. So we took those women, we sent them to India. They came back to try to electrify their village and give clean water and solar power. Our strategy at the Èzili network is not to have an intermediary between our people and their development. And we define development not as tourism. So development is to have local production, relevant education that's connected to your own history, your own culture, justice and security. These are the things that we talk about when we say development, and the ability to, like, education, local production, local production. I'm going blank, but essentially what is necessary to survive as a human being. So we have those women came back. The Clintons at that time had decided that they were going to own Haiti. It was after the earthquake, and they wanted to control solar power. And so they did all that they could to destroy our program. So that's part of the challenges of economic development. Economic development is war. So when you take women and you are taking them outside of the parameters that the European has said is development, which is, they want to push Black Haitian women into sweatshops, where we are in a mostly agrarian society. When the European says that Haiti lives off of $1 a day, they're talking about less than 100,000 jobs, because there's less than 100,000 wage earning jobs in Haiti. Most of the people survive on the informal economy and hustling and creating for themselves. What we need are more educated children that comes back and provide a infrastructure for that platform. And that's what we teach, and that's what we say. And like I said, with representation, I find myself constantly facing the white liberals like Paul Farmer, who is supposed to be the god of Haiti. We're always constantly exposing these people. I'll give you the example of why. When the cholera hit Haiti, because this is connected to COVID, when the cholera hit Haiti, it was because the Nepalese soldiers from Nepal had an outbreak of cholera in their country. They were not tested. They came to Haiti and they essentially infected the waterways. When that happened in October 2010, a couple of months after the earthquake that killed 310,000 Haitians in 33 seconds, and the European said he was going to just put 250,000 body bags for cholera victims, because he expected 250,000 Haitians to die of the infected water that they had brought us, these people that were supposed to bring us development and security. They brought us destruction, and that's what they bring. And their destruction consistently is the same. It's germs, guns, disease. It never changes. Our problem is we're constantly have children who are deceived by these people and want the comfort that they give certain Black collaborators. So with the cholera, Paul Farmer, who has all the media attention that they'll never give to Èzili Network and the Haitian women that are the backbone of the economy in Haiti, was UN Deputy Envoy under Bill Clinton. And I tried to go to court to have an injunction to stop the Nepalese soldiers, to quarantine them. They had their greatest intellectuals come after me saying, oh, the Haitians are the diseased ones, not the UN. And you would have seen some of these, very well-known 5 PhD Haitian men coming to say that Èzili Dantò was crazy when she says that it's the UN that brought cholera to Haiti. And then they had this white man that these Haitian intellectuals and academics love, Harvard professor. Remember, all those Ivy Leagues are part of the enslaving process. Neoliberalism is all about about making public your resources to their oligarchs. That's all it is, but they call it free trade. So Paul Farmer, in that instance, as the UN Deputy Envoy, said that the source of this disease was not important. You can go Google that today, because the same depopulation, genocidal, demented people want to destroy 7.5 billion people on the planet. They said they want only 500 million, which means they want to destroy 7 billion people. So what did he do, Paul Farmer, under Bill Clinton and Obama? They stopped the ability to go into court, to have the UN be quarantined, and stop that disease from becoming an epidemic in Haiti. But today, that same person, Paul Farmer, is the head of contact tracing for COVID in Massachusetts. And so those are my experiences, right? So how could he be the head of contract tracing when he said the source in Haiti did not matter, and he allowed my people to die? So we have these experiences, we share them with other people. We tell folks, like with COVID right now, go back to the earth, get yourself grounded. Remember, as I said at the beginning, I am both a defender by nature that give voice to the great mother. We are caretakers, but also we are a galactical people. And I think I'm the only person that talks about that and what's in Haiti in terms of its native resources, right? I'm not just talking about the resources that the European wants to take, right? That's why he's in Haiti right now, because we're the weakest link between Cuba and Venezuela. And in those waters, there's oil. In those mountains, there's iridium, there's gold, and all of those things. But beyond that, I want my people in the Caribbean, I want my people in Africa to understand that we are a galactical people, that there's cosmic things happening right now with regards to COVID that we need to really pay attention to, because I know, as a descendant or ascendant of the Haitian warriors, that what they did could not have been done without being quickened, without their DNA having been activated. And so we have a lot of zombies in the world right now because we have been zombified by education, by their economic system, by their religion, and so forth. So what is power? Power, my people, is self-reliance. It's not dependence. It's understanding that you're part of the biosphere, that you are stardust. Study these things. Once you know your power, and because what we know is not expressed in our daily lives. But with COVID, for instance, the United States, I mean, their numbers are humongous, right? In terms of people that have died. Why? Part of it is because the health industry is about, just like the media industry and the education industry is about dumbing you down. Well, the health industry in the European nations, and certainly what I know in America, is about keeping you sick so that the big pharma could make money. The reason that in Haiti, we have less cases of COVID than, let's say, the Dominican Republic, which we share the island with, isn't it ironic? The Dominican Republic, who hate us, who are like, as if, say, if you were in the United States, like the Dominican Republic is having the southern states of America win the Civil War. And they're right on our border. And under Obama, the Black collaborator, CIA Manchurian candidate that he is, Dominican Republic made apartheid legal in the Western Hemisphere. And there was no leader anywhere in the Caribbean that said anything. So we stand alone. We understand it. But what I want to show you now is that access to all that awful pedophilic sex trafficking, prostitution that they call development in the Dominican Republic. Today, Haitians are running back into Haiti to escape COVID. More Haitians in America have died of COVID, unfortunately, than in Haiti, because we are in the front lines. The nurses, the caretakers for old people at these old people's homes, in the factories. So we are dying. So how do the Èzili network approach that? We speak to the nurses associations in New York. There was a point in time when the COVID hit, when they were giving like triple the hourly rate for these nurses to come to work. And at a certain point of time, we had to try to push and say, stop. Your immune system, the dollars that you're making is not worth your life. Where you're going to bring this back to your children. And so we have had to operate differently with COVID. And we have had to go back to grandmama's medicine, grandmama's lemon and ginger and all those names in Creole that if I said them, you wouldn't know what they were, okay? But Haitien ou kon sa mabdino, right? So, nou pran feuille, right? Feuille, herbs, right? That's what has saved Africa. Most important, what has saved us in Haiti is the sun and our connection, because we are magnetic people. And that magnetism and electricity is very important to keep grounded. And in our industrial lives, we are not grounded. So in Haiti, we've been able to um, dodge the bullet of COVID. However, the depopulation people have just announced that they want to give free vaccines to Haiti. And let me take this opportunity to say to every Haitian who doesn't know their history and who decides that they're not sick, but they're going to take this because the Europeans going to give them an incentive. They always give you some food or something. That's what they do. And at this point in my life, after all these years, Haitian women were the guinea pigs for the pill, the birth control pill. They used us as their guinea pigs, and they've always used us as their guinea pigs, you know, medical apartheid. They've always used Black women, which is why when you look at the current media blitz, you know, they put a Black woman over here right in front of you. It's like, oh, she helped develop this. I always remind people of the Tuskegee experiment. One of the reasons they got a lot of those men into that foul experiment is they had a Black woman nurse who was respected in the community, and that's who they used. And that is what's going to happen. So I urge people to remember the template of the Haitian Revolution. Tokens are there to maintain white supremacy and get comfortable. It doesn't matter how much of the degraded masses that is killed. So remember that, Haiti. And I'm going to say this straight out to you, Haitians. If you take this World Health Organization Bill Pop vaccine, then whatever you get, you deserve. Because I believe that there's enough information out there for Black people not to trust the system of white supremacy that vies for the souls of Black folks. And that's about depopulation. They've announced it. So I think I've covered leadership, strategy, power, and representation. What we do is a non-colonial narrative on Haiti. We go after those Bretton Woods organization, profit over people, the oligarchs in Haiti. You will never know that the billionaires of the Caribbean live in Haiti. There are 13 families. They were brought from the Arab nations of Syria and Lebanon because the United States, France, and Canada, and all these people know that before they started the transatlantic slave trade, there was over 1,000 years of Arab slave trade. So they bring them today. They are the banes of our existence. 98% of Haiti's wealth is controlled by the Syrians, Lebanese, and their names are Bijou and Merv and Abdallah. I say their names. I want to let you know that I've had 6 assassination attempts. This is the price of being a leader. This is the price of standing up to white supremacy. Power is not a position within the slavedocracy. Power is self-reliance. Power is self-determination. Power is self-respect. Power is remembering your ancestral legacy. Representation is not the white liberals. All they do is delay the revolution. So don't ask permission to represent yourself. If you, like me, don't see yourself out here, right? There's all different types of women that have all different types of initiatives. So I'm just one. Go create what you don't see. Thank you very much to the Caribbean perspective, Alofemi, Cindy Peters, and everyone else for inviting us. Much appreciated.
Wow, wow, wow. Powerful, powerful, powerful. I think we had a great explanation this afternoon about who we are as women in the Caribbean, who we are as women in the world, and our role have played and they are continuing to play in the struggle. Now we're going to open it up for some Q&A. So you can use the raise hand icon, or you can post your question in the chat. So I would ask, in the wee hours of the morning, because both of you, both panelists discussed having numerous roles to play, and they're involved in numerous organizations and engagements. How do you keep the fire burning? That's my question. What do you do to continue on this struggle? Because it's a lot. You have a lot of responsibilities. You're in different spaces. You're wearing many hats. Can you give us some tips on as to how we can continue and give us and tell us what you're doing to maintain in the struggle?
I will offer the following so that it comes across really clear. When I started with African Women Lead, I'm saying that through my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, not ignoring the men, but I have to go to that mitochondrial DNA space, because if it was just about a me thing, then I could easily just kind of lean back, use that PhD, and just float. If it were just about me. However, it's when I look in the eyes of my children, and when I say my children, not only my several birth children or my several grandchildren, but when I look into the eyes of our children that are looking for us to prepare their legacy, just like how they see the Eurasian terrorists creating a legacy for the Eurasian world, yeah? I'm very clear on shifting from, because there's nothing supreme to me in terrorism. So what keeps me moving forward is that ancestral vibration that comes from our long-standing legacy. And I'm saying that we have traversed this is going to throw persons off, but we have to pull on traversing for millions of years, not just navigating a millennium or so ago. We have to really go into, when persons say that they feel spirit and that they walk in light and they walk in truth, the reason I pulled on that image of Ma'at was because I chose to call on that ancestral, like long ago trajectory that allows for us to even keep doing this work, because the assassination attempts are real. The dismantling of persons' socioeconomic stability is real. The interference in persons' ability to just do the work that you are charged and blessed and guided to do is real. And I'm going to speak to what happens living in a space that is a colony of the US in 2020, that you have to be mindful, because you're still in a space that even when you deal with the government, they're asking permission, like Chirin in 2020. So it's going to take these types of versations, these types of gatherings to gather the support that persons, the same way that we're able to spend $100 US or more per month to AT&T or Sprint or Verizon for a cell phone, that we can put the same amount, if not more, towards an effort, whether it's through the Èzili Dantò Foundation, through the Per Ankh Foundation, or whichever foundation that is really helping our people. Like, that's what keeps a lot of my energy flowing. If it requires that I fast sometime, I do that. If it requires that I go into ancestral ceremony, I do that. If it requires that I call my 98-year-old mother, who is still clear of mind and gives me small words of guidance, because she said, I don't need to talk to you long because you're going to do what you want. But she gives me guidance and I listen. That's part of what keeps me in, of course, for those that think I didn't say it, the omnipotent, almighty, ancestral creator of all, by all the names we use. I say Netera, some people say Yehovah, Yahweh, Obata, whichever the name is, I call on that to help me and to guide me so that it's not just about me, that I walk in a space that is beneficial to the greater good of our people and humanity, and that I'm, even when I feel that I should just step back, I follow that guidance. I really follow that guidance, because as Sister Queen Èzili has shared, we've had the opportunity to speak in previous settings, years ago, but previous settings. You know, we have to do this work because this legacy commands that. We don't have a choice. We had the luxury of being able to get certain credentials to do certain work, but that doesn't mean you do that work and then dust off your people. You have to, that means you have to be even more responsible and required to be more engaged, and be, not just look at it as being sacrificial, but look at it as, this is your charge. This is part of your ancestral legacy. When we speak of legacy, this is the legacy. And so I'm hoping that all the brothers and sisters that are on this call are really hearing the fullness of, when we're talking about, it's one thing to talk about leadership, strategy, representation, and power. But when we say power, that means everybody on this call has something to do and something to contribute, something to give to this. It's not just for us to have this intellectual exchange and then ta-ta for now. It's not that kind of gathering. That's what keeps at least Nusut Mut Chenzira in that space. That's how I keep that, because there are days that you may get up and be a little tired, but we don't have the luxury of being tired. We just don't have that luxury, especially when we're saying African women lead. We don't have that luxury.
Wow. Dr. Dantò, you want to?
I greet Dr. Sherazade, because we've seen each other and known each other for a long time. And there's a woman right here who's been bringing herself in the manner of the ancestors. All that she said is true. Yeah, there's been times when the trauma has been deep, when it's affected my health, when it's make you insane. This work that we do. And I'm in the firm belief that because we are women, sometimes that hurt, that trauma is very intense. But how do we go on, right? My thing is that I don't follow the European way of compartmentalization. If I need to scream, I'm going to write a play and I'm going on stage and I'm going to do it. Like, I have found a way to release, and it's through my writings. I started life as an athlete, so I know that if something is too much in my head, I remember my grandmother and the Haitian women, when you go to a funeral, especially in the countryside, they would literally have a sachet and tie their stomachs, because as women, a lot of our emotion and even our mind is in our stomachs. And so I know I'm a different person than a man, that I carry the energy sometimes in my stomach, but it's also in my stomach and not in my mind that I'm able to live the contradictions. So if the psychopaths are so demented that they would rape a 6-year-old boy and then film it and put it on the internet, right? That stuff would make you crazy. And then you're representing that child but they go to the mother and pay that mother some money, and all of a sudden you're not representing that child. These are things that happen. And you have to learn how to roll through the fire. And I think the way I do it is through the culture, because there's not a circumstances that I face that the Haitian culture hasn't got me through. Because the very greeting of a Haitian when they meet each other, it's like "sac passe," right? It's like, what's going on? And they say, "I'm rolling through the fire." It's right there. You know, once you kind of open up your mind to see the way our ancestors dealt with it, you know, how did they deal with being raped? How did Défilé, who had her own brigade and who supplied all the armies of the Haitian Revolution, before that time, you know, she was constantly being raped by that Frenchman who was her so-called master. Of course, she brought justice to him before she joined the Haitian Revolution. So, but how did she do that and maintain her dignity? I mean, we may not be, perhaps are not getting raped in the manner that our ancestors got raped, but we are getting raped mentally in the same manner. And how do you get through that? I think that right now, January 1st is when the Haitian revolutionaries signed their independence. The woman who was Dessalines' wife, her name, the empress, her name is Marie-Claire Heureuse. She was a healer. And so if you're looking for an example of how you get through this crucible, Marie-Claire Heureuse, Dessalines' wife, is a fantastic resource. She created a soup. It's called soup joumou. I urge all of you, because I'm always so proud of our culture, of our cuisine, of what our women left us. And in that soup joumou, that's squash. You can look it up, soup joumou. Every Haitian is going to be drinking that soup on January 1st. And it has, as Professor Baina Bello tells us, all of these ingredients, all of these herbs that are supposed to bring up your energy. That's how she used to heal, was through these herbs. The squash, the thyme, the parsley, and all that's in there, and the root vegetables, right? And so we have that in our own hands. This is our tool. You know, don't get away from those GMOs. Love your own organic space and organic garden. Exercise. We are caretakers, and a lot of us end up taking care of family members who are terminally ill. That goes on and on with us as women and children, and you know, we have lots of trauma. But put it in your stomach, not in your head. Speak to your angels, because the first angel in the universe is the Black woman. Down your lineage. There is force and power there. There is force and power in ritual. And those of you who want to see the rituals that we go through right now, because December is Makaya. As I said, our people were galactic people. They understood that this is the end of the sun year of 2020 and the beginning of 2021. So these last few weeks are cleansing time. So cleanse yourself in the way of your grandmother. I remember my mother used to give all castor oil and so on. Cleanse yourself. Cleanse yourself of everything, not just in your body, but in your mind, to begin this new serpentine path. We are not a linear people. We follow the serpentine path. That's really what Dambala and Aida Wedo is about, right? But a lot of Vodouists are listening to these white liberals who knew nothing about that DNA that we as scientists understood is what is how you live, you know, because if you're not flexible, then you will break. So whatever comes at you, nurture yourself, be flexible, find a mentor, whether it's Gangiton, whether it's Defile, whether it's someone from, you know, the Virgin Islands that came from our past, but the answers are there. Nurture yourself, caretakers. You can't be responsible for a child after that child has grown and makes different choices. Love yourself. Love that you did what you could to do, and then move on to create. That would be my advice. It's something I'm doing all the time, trying to do.
Wonderful, wonderful points. We have one question in the chat. There are two questions in the chat. I'll read the first one. And it says, if we live and work in a colonial system, how do we take back our power and identity without economic decline for future generations and present? Anyone can answer.
Before we finish, I just wanted to say that after working in for 30 years in this field, in this kind of laku, the Èzili network has come up with 3 solutions for a new world. And we give that to all of the politicians who are in power. We say 1 Western Hemispheric passport, 1 Western Hemispheric minimum wage, and Haiti can't be one of these so-called nations as defined by the European. We are a sacred space, a World Heritage Site. So those are the 3 things that we bring as solutions. I think that, and I'm answering your question to say that we have to step outside of the parameters of white defined nation or what is possible, and go outside this, you know, that revolution is voting in an election for the same system to stay on. I always talk about Auger. He was the mulatto before the Haitian Revolution that went to, and he was watching the 1789 French Revolution where they were getting rid of the monarchy, and the Jacobins wanted to have rights within the system where there was still slavery. And he was, as a affranchi, as a Black freeman, he wanted the same rights. He says, I have property. I should have voting rights. But he wanted voting rights within a slavetocracy. And that's exactly where we are today. We're looking for voting rights and position within a system that's unequal in the first place, that only allows for, you know, not the masses to participate, but little tokens and assimilated, integrated people, so that you can't be who you are. So I think that we have the 3 points: 1 hemispheric passport, 1 Western minimum wage. And I have gone through too many fake elections in Haiti. I have seen too many senators and deputies with no power, except, you know, the European and all of their very consulate will go to a person who supposedly is representing the people and buy them off. So for me, that sort of structure doesn't represent my people and what we are. So I present to the world these 3 points, that we have to define a nation in a different way. And if there was 1 minimum wage, no Haitian would try to go to anywhere. 1 minimum wage, make it $15, make it a living wage. Who would go to the cold of the north if they could stay at home? But more than that, entrepreneurship is the way that we have to go, not to work within that wage earning system. So I think that those are the types of thinking that we need to have. And we have to support our agricultural women. We have, there's, like I said, I took Haitian women and sent them to India. There's a whole world right now out here, and the digital world is about to change the wealth gap, and we have to be ahead of that game for our people.
Well, I want to say I concur with my beloved sister queen, because she gave us some direct recommendations. And because of me being comfortable with this question, I just want to share something to give context to what I'm about to say. Quote, Virgin Islanders, a quiet and humble people, should not be allowed to rule themselves for 100 years, and when so, should be done under white rule, for there are militants among them, unquote. And that's from the naval governor, Sumner Eli Wetmore Cattell, who was governing the Virgin Islands of the US in 1922. I want to give context to what I'm going to respond. It's very difficult for persons to detach themselves from its inception, from the purchase and transfer. And I need persons to be really clear on this. The Virgin Islands is the most expensive real estate the United States of America purchased in its history, from 1776 to present, per acre. Okay, remember I said earlier, 84 square miles, 32 square miles, 19 square miles in the 2 square miles Walter Island. $25 million in gold. The Danish kingdom did not want fiat money. In 1917, just so we get the whole picture of what we're dealing with in terms of their most expensive real estate purchase per acre, that did not include in this purchase, transfer, sale, the inhabitants, predominantly African people in this space, just so that we get context. So it's very challenging, not impossible, but very challenging to make that living, working relationship in a space that has been systemically and institutionally raped and exploited from inception. So granted, here in the Virgin Islands, we carry a US passport, However, can't vote for the president of the United States, even though some persons wouldn't want to anyway. However, they can't vote for the president of the United States. The representative that sits in US Congress, very powerful, very influential in terms of engagement, discourse, lobbying, etc., does not have a vote in the US Congress. We need to be really clear. However, we have an Internal Revenue Bureau, so we could pay IRS. The various taxes that are garnered here are sent to the US. Most permissions have to come through the US Department of the Interior. So it's not impossible, but it comes in a very revolutionary space when you have to balance between keeping this revolutionary vibration of African women lead and just being independent, pushing your ancestral sovereignty beyond the limits of the Eurasian terrorism that is guarding you, okay? And it's not that it's impossible. It just means that these queries, these actions towards self-determination, and I need to highlight that. I'm gonna put the link in the chat again. People will notice I'm gonna just put links, because it's good that you look at a people's historical journey to self-determination.com, primarily because by looking at that site, then you can get an opportunity to see all of the treaties, the agreements, the programs, the entrepreneurial initiatives, and the directive, let me be more specific, not a declaration, but the decree. Think of it like a papal bull. You know, when they have a decree, it lasts for like centuries and millennia and forever. People have to get to that space here and within the Caribbean. When we are hearing our sisters say that no Caribbean head of state nation came to the support and energy to help Haiti, that's not cool. That's not good. And it's not to say that certain civil society networks or non-governmental organizations did not provide that support. But many times these heads of state in these very capitalist, imperialist, exploitative run entities are, I don't think the right word is going to come right now, so I'm going to use a gentle word. Cowardice is real. Cowardice is real, and fear has been instilled into the very essence of most persons. So when they see that there might be an attack on their financial stability, they're not going to go that way. Most persons aren't going to go that way. Most persons aren't going to be willing to make those sacrifices. And until we work together, until when we have these gatherings that we leave from here, well, you know, I'm going to give a little bit of my resource towards the Èzili Dantò Foundation. I'm going to give a little bit of my resource to the UNIAACL RC 2020. Whichever organization or interest that you can feel comfortable supporting, that's how you begin to keep it going. We have to work on dismantling the very damaging, destructive, exploitative elements of capitalism and imperialism. At the end of the day, it's this particular socioeconomic infrastructure that we're following that is dismantling our humanity. We sit here and say we worrying about, that's why humanitarian organizations could go to countries and rape people, because it's coming from a very exploitative space. So when they say humanitarianism, that's not what we mean. You understand? Humanitarians are supposed to know to deal with shared humanity and show love and compassion and care for people. And we can't do that if you're worrying about economic stability, because the system that we live within is designed for us to be unstable and for us to be at war consistently. And if you're always at war and attempting to be free all the time, just visualize what the trauma is like. You already had trauma from enslavement. You had another layer of trauma from colonialism. And now you're dealing with a living, breathing, capitalist, imperialist type of exploitation that destroys the very fabric of your existence. And now they're telling you, stay home, wear a mask, 6 foot physical distancing, don't touch your family, don't go outside in the sun. That's what they're telling you. Whether they want to say it's for COVID or the new breed of COVID now that they got everybody else fighting on SARS-2, we have to like shift so that our level of entrepreneurship, our level of governance that we demand changes completely to a legacy that is beneficial for us, period. So that's when you say, how do you deal with this colonial system? You answered that. You have to dismantle this colonial system, period.
Wow.
Capitalism is a virus and a disease too.
Good to see you all.
I was away for a little while. I'm sorry, I had to leave the meeting for a little while. So I don't know if this was anyway addressed, or I would really like to comment. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, Èzili Dantò, for her wonderful presentation. She was very inspiring, and you know, she faced a lot of challenges that we have to address. And I really have to commend her for her courage, because it's very, very hard work fighting against entrenched colonialism. And particularly, you know, we have these views about the UN I worked with the UN for a little while, many years ago. And, you know, as she said, it is controlled by just a handful of European people. And so it's very, very difficult to bring about any change. I just wondered if she has, you know, I know she spoke about some things that we need to implement, but if she could say a little bit more about how we can engage young people, you know, in this struggle, because it's very, very hard, particularly if they're subjected to the colonial educational system. And I have a beef, particularly with religion, which I see as very, very divisive in the Caribbean community, and which has been used to oppress us, and is very dominant in the oppression of Black people. So, you know, I just wondered if she has any more thoughts on that she would like to, you
Well,
know.
thank you so much for the question, and I appreciate the appreciation. The hard truth is that not all of us are going to make it through. The longer I live, the more I see that our educated classes are the bane of our existence, and they have promoted to the young this idea that money is everything. It doesn't matter how you make it. There's no morality. There's no essence of self. But the good news is, I believe that none of us here on this live are part of that vibration. And because I'm a voodooist who understand the connection of mass consciousness, I know that the change will happen very quickly when it happens. And the awakening and the activation of the DNA is not something that's going to be in the European linear manner. How do we get the youth to understand that our culture is our sword, that we are a community people, that, I mean, in the United States right now, the most popular song is from a Dominican woman whose ancestry is about prostitution. And the strippers are elevated. So we went from a space of Queen Nzinga and the Dahomey warriors and the mother gods who would choose which of her sons would lead, to a space where Biden in his election went to a stripper to get to the Black community. That's the space that we're in at the moment. And I don't think that it's just in the United States, because it's about values. And this demented psychopath that's ruling the planet is a vampire. And he brings out the lowest common denominator. And he uses all of his Najoki to do that. And right now his Najoki, he uses his music, his digital colonialism, his all of these digital spaces where our youth are in these digital spaces. And in these digital spaces, they create software where they desensitize people to violence, desensitize people to death, and desensitize people to gangsterism. I think that it's each one teach one, and it's going to be just a few who are going to release the many. I don't think that there's going to be this great movement where the lowest common denominator is just destroyed. I think we have to stand in our own dignity, like all of you here, and not compromise. That's what I think. And I think that that leadership of being who you are and standing within your own power, because that whole idea, what you have to understand right now is that, I'll give you an example of what they're doing to the youth of Haiti. Now, I could give up on those youth because they've become very violent. When a couple of years ago, Haiti was one of the least violent places in the Caribbean. Even though they brought the UN in there, it was literally, Brazil had 4 times the violence, and Brazil was our generals, right? Because they know how to keep the favelas down. So the diabolical European brought them to Haiti. And what did they bring? All their mess, right? Kidnapping, which is something they do over there a lot. Now it's an epidemic in Haiti. And Haitians don't manufacture guns, just like Jamaica and the other Caribbean nations, but all of a sudden you see that. What we have to understand, that it's a bigger question. Our children are not this violent. I have studied this and I have seen it. As soon as Haitians go out into the streets, and let's say they're protesting some injustice that just happened, let's say a police just killed someone, right? All of a sudden you see these militarized water and toxins. They spray that stuff on them. And then 2 weeks later, you see these Haitian children chopping people's off. They're like crazy. So we have to really understand that the weapons they're using against our children to make them totally amoral, totally desensitized, are more powerful and different than they were in the time of our ancestors. We have to understand that. And you can't get to them unless you can get them out into the ground and different food and into the sun, because they have definitely taken the minds of our children. And it's very difficult to get into the minds of a child who's been activated by satellites to do things for the European, that they, once they come down from that high and from that drug, they don't know what happened. As a lawyer, I've seen it. So I think that we have to become cognizant that we are dealing with bioengineering. And I'm going to say this one more time. The sun is our medicine.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Get them out into the sun. If you're a grandmother, if you're a mother, and all of a sudden you see your child coming home from school and they're violent, most likely they gave them something to eat, put something in the air. This is not what we give birth to. Trust yourself. I did not give birth to that. And then figure out how to bring the healing. That's my answer, because I find that many of us are very naive. All of a sudden we see the youth. In Dominican Republic, they've had generation after generations of prostitutes. This is what white boys go to Dominican Republic to do. And it's norm. It's the norm, to the point where they come to the United States and become big stars. They hate Haitians, but they come into the Black community in the United States and they're big stars. We have to address these issues ourselves. We have to understand that Black women did not give birth to stone cold criminals. What was the pattern that created this? And how can we make sure that it doesn't happen to the younger ones, to the ones that have not been? I always say to people, okay, don't send them to the public school. Do private homeschooling. Why would you do that? Send them to your enemies at such an age. That's my answer. Don't send them to their schools. Don't send them to their doctors. Don't do any of that. Take care of your own. That's what Dessalines said to Toussaint. We have all that we need. And we have got to get that back, that understanding. Listen, okay? When I go into these very highfalutin spaces where all these PhD Haitians and whites, say all of them are there, right? And they come to me. I said, if it's not feeding a child, I don't want to hear about it, right? So they have all of these kind of development apparatus. If it's not feeding a child, giving health to a child, giving nurturing to a child, giving relevant education and a trade to a child. Dessalines said every Black person should have something that they could do so that they're useful, not just this intellectual stuff. That's my answer. I hope it answered.
Wow, wow, wow. That's
I just want to add something to augment what our sister said. I put it in the chat because it's important that we study these things on our own when we have time to really digest it. So when that reference is made to the Dominican Republic, and there's another set of reasons why I would speak to that, we want to look at this book, The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, so that we understand systemically what Santo Domingo in particular was designed for during the enslavement period as a breeding ground, and for a similar type of Europeanization by breeding so that they could remove that African root completely and to dismantle the sexual engagement and to exploit the people in that space to the point that that term octoroon, quadroon, pustice, mustice that we use had a very specific history in, quote, Hispaniola, quote, Quisqueya, that when the indigenous Quisqueyan people were in that space, very different. And with the influx of the forms of exploitation, specifically in what we're now calling Santo Domingo, República Dominicana, whatever, why we would see this kind of behavior coming out of that space. Very similar to certain things we see in certain parts of Brazil, some of the similar exploitation and removal of African presence that we see in Uruguay, Paraguay, Ecuador. It was a technique. It was a technique, and we need to be real clear on it. So I put that link there. You can find the entire publication as a PDF to just kind of go to the data that shows you why those things happen and why there's been this forced type of shift in engagement to dismantle the moral aptitude, the moral code, the moral values in these spaces like in Haiti, in the Dominican Republic, and within the wider Caribbean, which is spreading because now our youth think that that over-sexualization and that over-genderization piece where you're navigating on being binary or non-binary, that's the priority, not your liberation, not your self-determination, not your freeness, and definitely not your independence or your socioeconomic entrepreneurship. So I just needed to add that little caveat. At some point, we can have more discussion on that to share. Because again, women are at the center of that. Center. So we have the opportunity, when African women lead, we transform that. We move different. We give a different example of how to be, even if it's not popular. Yeah. And we have to keep that. So give thanks for that sharing, Sister Gwen.
There's Miranda Laurent Stephenson. She hails from the Kalinago community in Dominica, and she's employed with the government of Dominica as a team leader of the East Agricultural District. Miranda, would you like to tell us a little bit about your work?
Greetings, everyone. That's Miranda from Dominica. I come from a unique race of people. The Kalinago community in Dominica, we are native to the island and in minority as well. And I work in the agricultural ministry as a team leader to the East District. So basically, I work with women, women farmers, rural women, agro processors, and that sort of line of work. So I'm happy to be part of this discussion. And unfortunately, I missed the first one. I wanted to hear a little more about the mental health Zoom meeting of last time, but anyway, it doesn't. We're moving on. So this is me. Hello? Hello?
Yes, go ahead. Hello, Ms. Stevenson.
You still there?
Did we lose her? Okay, well, let's go on to our second speaker.
Yes. So I'm Kwame Wilberg. I'm not the second speaker, but I want to welcome you all here. I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Chenzira Davis Kahina. Did I get that right, Dr. Chen?
Pretty well. That was good. That was good.
Okay. She is a cultural griot, artist, educator, published author, motivational speaker, media technologist, ordained priestess, innovative visionary community activist, creative developer, mother and grandmother. Big respect for all that. Davis Kahina is known as Dr. Chen, is a founder and manager, director of the Per Ankh House of Life, an international NGO promoting the institutionalization of culture, healing arts, technology, and education for life, inspiration, freedom, and education. Davis Kahina is the founding director of the Virgin Islands Caribbean Cultural Center and teaching faculty at the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences at the University of the Virgin Islands, the only HBCU in the Caribbean. And I could say a whole lot more about Dr. Chen, but I wouldn't indulge. So I will stop there for now, and you'll hear more from her directly.
Well, first and foremost, I want to just encourage everyone that's listening to just take a moment and really just take a very deep breath, because it's going to be a lot said in less than 15 minutes. So let's just first take a deep breath, yeah? And just hold that breath, reflect on everything that has manifested in your life, not just 2020, but in general. And then release anything negative that will clutter your mindset, then exhale. Now, the reason I wanted to start in that form, I'm really grateful. I cannot give words because I was asked to do this while doing another activity. So I'm very grateful for the organizers that are really beginning to see the significance of, I love that name, Caribbean Progressive Perspectives. That sounds like we're going to get work done, like real work. And I think it's really critical that the whole idea of having this versation, and I'll say versation because we're adding our verse, we're literally adding our lyrics to a new narrative of how we begin to look at the Caribbean as native, indigenous, ancestral persons. I'm going to say that one more time so we're all in the same space. Native, indigenous, ancestral persons. Some of us really focus on the African portion. Some of us blend between the African and the indigenous native Amerindian portion. And some of us go into all of the different Eurocentric, Eurasian connections because everybody's ancestry gonna connect to something African, Eurasian, and indigenous, because indigenous has a multiplicity of meanings and definitions. And I shared that from not just the intellectual perspective, but from a perspective of how we begin to restore our shared humanity. So one of the questions I do have is, am I able to share my screen?
Yes, you may.
Okay, fantastic, because that will make this portion of the a little bit, so you just don't have to focus on moi. I like for persons to see pictures, and that way they can kind of be involved in the process. And I'm hoping that it will share correctly. Are you able to see that portion? I just want to make sure that it's still navigating appropriately when I start. If it's not moving, is it moving though? Are you able to see the different slides or only the first one?
The first one.
Okay, so right now it didn't change to leadership. Well, I'm going to start here in respect to time. And I'm hoping that our other colleague that was part of the panel, because she started really sharp, to offer that voice of the indigenous brethren and sisters of the Kalinago nation of Dominica. So I really would desire to have that conversation. We talk about African women lead. This is actually a movement that has been established over the years through various organizations, specifically the Revolutionary African Women Group that grew out of efforts and work of sisters associated and organizing in the All African Women's Revolutionary Union, which is the women's wing of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, an international African organization that focuses on the institutionalization of Pan-Africanism, defined as the total liberation and unification of Africa under a scientifically socialist government. So I want to make sure that we get like the context of some of the things we're going to share in terms of active leadership, the various strategies connected to the active leadership, as well as
Sister Cindy, we are having a lot of feedback. I don't know if all of us can mute.
Okay. Okay, then I will shift this. Are you able to see the different screens if I do it like this?
I can.
Okay. I just want to make sure, no, because I'd rather you see what I'm speaking to than for us to have like a, are you able to hear me better now?
Yes, a little bit of wind, but yes.
Okay, you know what? I know exactly what I'm going to do. Pause. Is that better?
You close the window.
Is that, yeah, that's what I had to do. I had to close the window.
Yes, much better.
No worries, no worries. So let me just go back to the beginning. So we speak from a space of African women lead, because whenever we're talking about Caribbean perspectives, Caribbean life, Caribbean transformation, and of course, Caribbean revolution, that term that sometimes frightens some, but that is integral to the Caribbean space. The Caribbean has been centripetal to virtually every single revolution on the earth. There's connections of persons from the Caribbean basin, whether it is as far north as the Bahamas, as far south as the northern portions of South America, Guyana, French Guiana, Cayenne, Suriname, all of these spaces, inclusive of those little islands that we sometimes overlook, that recently were not overlooked. And I send our solidarity and our well wishes and support to our brothers and sisters in San Andreas and Isla Providencia and Santa Catalina that have just endured significant damage from recent hurricanes. And sometimes we forget that a lot of these Caribbean spaces are still colonized, are still identified as protectorates or commonwealths, or in the case of here in the Virgin Islands, a non-incorporated, non-self-governing territory of the United States in 2020. So I want to kind of highlight when we speak of leadership that we're talking about an essential piece of leadership that really focuses on people. Leadership is to be tied to people. Leadership is not for the sake of just being a leader for a leader for a leader. It's supposed to be tied to humanity. And that humanity should be a shared consciousness that we allow ourselves to look, respect, engage in a dignified manner, and ensure integrity. And of course, sustain those moral values that allow for us to really help one another in these spaces. And that has been part of the conversation when we talk about reconciliatory revolutionary work. Because persons, you speak of revolution and then persons, oh my goodness, you're speaking of fire totally. And it's not just fire, it's air, fire, earth, and water. And I come to those basic elements because those are the elements that affect what is going on right here in our Caribbean spaces. And some persons sometimes exclude the Virgin Islands because specifically VI US, not so much VI British, but definitely here because persons sometimes feel that there's more of an Americanization, which there is to a point, than there is a Caribbeanness, overlooking that the organic foundational cornerstone of this space is a very Caribbean one, whether some people believe it or not. So some of the solutions that come in terms of this conversation around leadership, and I want to kind of keep it in that space, is around sovereign power, whether or not that is a worthy quest for persons in these type of colonial spaces, liberating social justice. We've seen social justice affect the entire globe, and in smaller forms, it has also engaged in what is taking place here in the Virgin Islands and our connections to the wider Caribbean. This quest for self-determination, which is an ongoing conversation. We have organizational entities here that are called A People's Historical Journey to Self-Determination. And I encourage persons to just Google and just look at the site and you'll see a wealth of information in that regard. And then we're talking about harmonious social governance. How do we prepare our leaders to then not only be self-prepared to lead, but then to actually be prepared to help people to lead in their familial spaces, in their places of work, worship, engagement, and so forth. How do we do that? And we've had some engaging history that has brought this truth to light. So I'd like for us to just kind of focus on this illustration. It's an actual painting that was done for production called The Queens of the Virgins. And these are actually 3 women. None of them were born in the Virgin Islands. However, their revolutionary fervor, their quest for freedom, self-determination at all costs, spanned between 1733 and 1892 and had a significant impact and influence on the quests for self-determination, decolonization, independence, and I could go on and on and on. And I want to just take a moment. So when we're looking at these particular women, that of course they had comrades that were kings in their own right, brothers that were right alongside, brothers that lost their lives in equitable measure for the work that was done by these 3 women. But I want persons to not just focus on what most people remember of St. Croix in particular for the Great Fire Burn of 1878, but I want to take us back to 1733. That first sister, Queen Brefu, originally from Central Africa. Many thought that she was from West Africa because she was captured in Central Africa and brought to the shores of Ghana, what is now Ghana, and brought over to St. Thomas. And then from St. Thomas, separated from her children. And she led one of the first successful African uprisings. And it was well organized because she was a strategist. And she came from leadership, from royal leadership, and organized where they held the island of St. John for 6.5 months before certain infiltrators, we'll refer to them as collaborators. Entities may refer to them, this may sound familiar for those that are comfortable in the literary realm, ostentatious cripples, the predators that actually came in and destroyed this revolutionary quest to do what? To establish African freeness and free nations in the Caribbean in 1733, November 23rd to be exact, which is now identified as Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day, according to the laws here in the Virgin Islands. That sister in the middle, that second queen, very well known, Queen Mary Thomas, born in Antigua, working as a laborer now in the 1870s in the island of St. Croix, and led a very fiery, very engaging labor uprising that many people thought lasted a day. It lasted for more than a month, where they burned over 1,000 acres of plantation property. And there were deaths. Some persons tried to say it was a dozen deaths. There are records that are now showing that there were hundreds of persons that were executed, and their bones lie underneath roads we drive over now. And again, women leading, women encouraging action, women implementing power and taking responsibility in that regard. The third sister, again, very different flavor, originally from what St. Kitts Nevis, Queen Keziah, okay, came here as a coal carrier, another laborer in St. Thomas. And one day, when they did not get their proper wages for their work, shut down that industry one day so they could get fair wages for their work. And now we have these cultural heritage education initiatives every September 12th in memory of Queen Keziah and the coal laborers of 1892. And October 1st, Queen Mary is celebrated, commemorated, along with the other queens and kings for leading the fire burn of 1878 in St. Croix. And as I said, November 23rd is Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day, according to the laws here in the Virgin Islands. And these are women that we get to show the connection of the Virgin Islands Caribbean, because again, they were not born here, but they gave their sweat to their brow, they gave their energy and their spirit, their strength, their leadership, their power right here in the Virgin Islands. When we speak of strategy, and I'm doing this in a complimentary manner so that we can actually engage in some conversation, I hope, or questions, is that we talk about transculturalism a lot when we speak of these things in an academic sense. And the grassroots community persons are looking for, how do you address my basic needs? What is sustainable activity that will help us in terms of social affairs and imbalances, economic affairs and imbalances, political affairs and imbalances, and how do we do this in a space that's 84 square miles for St. Croix, 32 square miles for St. Thomas, 19 square miles for St. John, and 2 square miles for Water Island. There's a little bit of extra to that. How do we do this holistically? How do we speak of these approaches? All of the research, we are very quick. We can rattle off the name of the men like this. We're going to say Rothschild Francis, Edward Wilmot Blyden, Dr. John, Joseph Manyakin. Now we can do that like that. We're going to speak of all of the governors by name, Melvin Evans, Cyril King. We can just run it all the way down. When it comes to speaking of the women now, and we overlook that the planners, the strategizers, the persons that were documenting the plan of action, the persons taking minutes and notes, the persons making sure persons were getting fed and prepared to engage in all of these different activities and programs and efforts were women. And that's been an ongoing conversation in terms of how do we begin to speak of these Native, Indigenous, ancestral African women in a more engaging and inclusive manner, so that when we're speaking of them, that we can start to call their names and we can begin to show the connectivity. If you're speaking of Edward Wilmot Blyden, then of course you have to speak of his wife. In addition, when we do the research, because there was more than one. And it's very important as we start to see, because what were these women doing? These women were engaged, whether it was through the church, whether it was through various communitarian organizations, whether it was to be alongside, and I want to highlight that, not just in back of or underneath, but alongside their men. Very different kind of conversation. And then again, we're speaking of it from a place of interdisciplinary analysis, so that where we're looking at it not only through what they did in the political sphere, but what were they doing in the economic sphere? What was happening in the marketplace? Remember who's in the marketplace. And in the marketplace, that's the center, the actual center of most life, Caribbean, African, indigenous, or otherwise, right? One of the pieces when we talk about leadership and strategy, as we've built from leadership coming into strategy, and persons are like, well, how does she bring this to Ma'at? These are ancestral principles. And when we talk about virtues, principles, morals, etc., organizational engagement, power, leadership, strategy, representation, as is the theme of today's gathering, you're speaking ultimately around truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness, and harmony all the time. Those several principles interweave into these conversations, whether it's the interdisciplinary transcultural analysis of these things, whether it is the political fabrication of what we think colonization is, or what we think decolonization looks like, or what we believe some people don't even feel that neocolonialism exists because it seems like it's the same colonialism just with a different cover. Because sometimes it appears as if the colonization that has impacted persons in the Caribbean has never lifted. Yeah. And we say this whether it's in English, Spanish, French, Dutch, Papiamento, or any of the other languages. Yeah. Because that's something that we tend to overlook when we speak of these revolutionary concepts and practices here in our Caribbean society. And I'm going to speak a bit more deeply in Caribbean civilization, because it's a civilization, because there's so much history, there's so much heritage, there's so much to share that sometimes we overlook that. And I place this conversation, and I say it in that form when we speak of womanism, because some persons are very quick to say that there's a different frame for how women gather in the Caribbean, and that feminism has done XYZ and QWR. So for the purposes of this particular sharing, I'm focusing on womanism in regard to the harmony that women instill within family, village, nation, and society for the purposes of this conversation. I'm not trying to underplay the feminist movement. I'm not trying to underplay any other gender practices and analyses, but for the purposes of us speaking from a space of Native, Indigenous, Ancestral, African understanding and awareness, we're speaking of womanism in that context and placing these principles of Ma'at in contemporary times in the embodiment of that. With representation, just for the purposes of what I have already shared, these are the types of themes that keep coming up. We keep speaking of these. What are the proactive strategies that we can utilize to engage with organizational entities, civil societies that keep women not only as the secretary and taking notes, but actually more, shall we say, in a secretariat position and actually engaged in the leadership, strategic engagement, power, and representation, and having more sistren at the table. And maybe I should be more specific. Organizing the table, not just at the table and look, because we're not trying to be like a Barbie doll and just be present and just be visible space, but to actually be proactive in the organization, the tools of engagement, all forms of analysis, and of course, practice and implementation when we're speaking of this Caribbean space, right? So I made a reference to the International Decade for People of African Descent because there are so many persons that are still figuring out in our region that there actually is or has been, we're going into the 7th year, and we still have persons in our region that are completely oblivious to the International Decade for People of African Descent from January 2015 to December 2024, with a theme of recognition, justice, and development for people of African descent, which gives us a significant opportunity to press not only what the United Nations designated, not only what the African Union has as part of their agenda, but what is the Caribbean region's agenda. And that has been really involved and led significantly by many of our sisters, some on this call, I'm sure, some on this Zoom gathering, I should say more correctly, I'm sure. And of course, those that are not here, but hopefully will get an opportunity to see this at a future time. This is something that, again, social media has a way of facilitating messages that go across like lightning in laser speed. So while we could sit and write emails and papers and research and seminars and workshops and conferences until oblivion ends, something as simple as we are coming for everything our ancestors were denied, again, brought forth. We saw this in something that came from the infamous model Imam. And persons wouldn't have expected that type of a message coming from her in her sphere and her circle. And it has spread throughout the Caribbean region, primarily by, I won't just say millennials, but I'll say even younger than millennials, by young people that are coming to the awareness, and young women in particular, that are part of various gatherings and movements. I want to move forward because I want to come to a close. Because when we speak of this International Decade for People of African Descent, I'm really encouraging persons to go to those sites, to engage and register for some of these, whether it's for the fellowships, for the various programs, if you have something happening in your respective area. Because here in the Virgin Islands, we were very fortunate to not only once, but on 3 occasions, have representation in the International Decade for People of African Descent in their Geneva-based activities, as we've had fellows, we've had persons that have gone and delivered reports in regards to affairs impacting the African population. We're majority people of African descent here in the Virgin Islands. And to see this representation come from a space that is still going through this decolonization shift with the United States of America, to the point that sometimes it feels as if you have to ask permission to exercise your rights, your human rights, your inalienable rights, as well as your unalienable rights, in a place that claims liberty, freedom, justice for all. I'd like us to keep that in reflection. And we're very fortunate because that particular person that represented us on several occasions just recently won a senatorial position in the 34th legislature. And I want to make sure I highlight by name, Senator-elect Genevieve Whitaker, JD. Want to highlight that, a millennial that is speaking truth to power in these areas. There is another set of names that I want to also highlight when I speak of power, because when we're talking about power, then we're talking about those conversations that have been centripetal to activities here in the Virgin Islands. The VI in our Caribbean base was very early on involved in anti-apartheid activities when it wasn't common and wasn't favorable in the populace in this region. And we're going back to the 70s and coming into the 80s, and then really engaged in the 90s, when it was around the conversation around reparations, and it was not a common piece. And while we're very grateful that there is now the CARICOM Reparations Commission that is really reaching out to the CARICOM nations, yes, and even those entities like the VI that are not part of CARICOM, except through civil society relationships, I need to highlight it's our women that are spearheading a lot of this work. It is young sisters and some not so young sisters that are in the forefront of a lot of this work. So whether it's to work with the Caribbean Pan-African Network, whether it's to work with the Organization of American States, which has its questionable interests all the time, or the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, or the Latin American Caribbean Economic Commissions and Councils, and the Central American Black organizations. And I could go on and on and on, whether it's the Universal Negro Improvement Association, African Communities League, RC 2020, and others. The effort has been spearheaded with this whole conversation of African women lead, and doing it not so much unapologetically solely, but with a space of support from our brothers, because we're feeling that we're doing this to be harmonious and to keep this restorative power at the center of our work so that we can address things like institutional and systemic racism. We can address things like disaster capitalism, which is a whole area of engagement of its own. We can address civil unrest so that we can understand why is there this civil unrest and this increase in gun violence in spaces where guns are not produced or manufactured. And why is this happening? Why are drugs the new in thing to the point that it's destroying the very fabric of our spiritual respect for this Caribbean civilization as a space? Those are types of things that we also highlight. So the COVID-19 pandemic just created a whole other personification of chaos because persons were already traumatized. Persons were already attempting to understand their self, their family, and their place in society in the Virgin Islands and the wider Caribbean. And I say it in that form because the Virgin Islands doesn't exist by itself. We're inside of the Caribbean and the Americas. And imagine what kind of trauma that instills in general, much less now with a global pandemic that is just shifting how we engage. And who is in the forefront? Again, women. As caretakers, as professionals, as scientists, as the mothers, grandmothers that are caring and attempting to care not only for self, but for their families, right? And having to be involved in some type of engagement. And I leave that term terrorism at the very end, because at the end of the day, really at the end of the day, it is really important for us to understand, to have discussion around leadership and representation and strategic engagement. Power concedes to power. And until we are comfortable in bringing those types of somewhat difficult and engaging discourses to the forefront, like our ancestors have set a standard for, we will continue to have these particular types of discussions over and over without the layer of implementation for us to move forward. So as I close, I just highlight African women lead, because there are so many names right here in the Virgin Islands, some that I've shared inside of the body of this discussion. We can speak of Susanna Abramson, Axelina Solomon. I've already mentioned Mary Thomas, Mathilda McBean, Felicita James, Mary Ann Christopher, more correctly, Mary Ann Golden Christopher, Leona Brady Watson. There's so many women that were centripetal to different activities in different ways. Some outright revolutionary, some more stealth-like in their revolutionary engagement, some just so religious and spiritual that their names are not even mentioned in many respects. And we have to correct that, right? Dr. Marva Sprague Brown was one of the few women that led the free beach movement here in the Virgin Islands that protected all of our water shores, or all of our waterfront properties that people are now clamoring to dismantle. And she was doing this in the 60s and the 70s. And it literally cost her her economic stability, although she had the credentials to be well endowed. It cost her to ultimately even her life, right? And we have to remember that we have many names, and I know there are other sisters that are part of this discourse. And I just ask that when we speak of women in the struggle, in the movement, specifically here in the Virgin Islands and in the wider Caribbean, that we always remember that African women lead. I'm really thankful. I appreciate the opportunity to share, and I hope that I have obviously engaged all of you with some thought-provoking ideas and understanding. Give thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chenzira, for that enlightening piece. We thank you again for this, opening up our eyes to some of this new information. For some of us, it's additional information to what we already know. And I just hope we take time to reflect on what she said, that African women lead. That's powerful. That's powerful. Our next speaker is going to be Ms. Miranda Stevenson. Miranda, the floor is yours. Please unmute your mic, Miranda. Thank you.
You're hearing me?
Yes, we are now. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I must say that the internet in my area is not the greatest. We're still recovering from Hurricane Maria, and in my area, the companies haven't reinstalled proper internet service, so you may find me fluctuating a bit. And I must say compliments to the previous speaker. I like the history she gave. I wasn't one of the greatest history students, but history is always good. You need to know where you come from to know where you're going, where you're heading. And as it relates to women and their struggles in leadership, strategy, power, and representation, like the brochure says, women are the foundation of our community and essential to our way forward. And really and truly, women have been, even if they are not in the leadership position or they were not really in leadership position, like Dr. I can't remember her name too well, just said, even if there's one person as seen as the leader, the women have always been doing the groundwork. They have always been the one pushing, propelling, encouraging, and providing the foundation for the men to be in leadership. So women have always been part of the struggle to be for the leaders, to the leaders. And as we look at strategy as it relates to women, when they have become leaders and in leadership position with power, when they are implementing activities, programs, projects for the communities, for the nation, they should very much consider the situations that women go through. So their strategy or their action plan can include means and ways of elevating women and elevating women that are less fortunate, because you have different categories. There's different categories of oppressiveness. There's different categories, because you will find those that are abused physically, those that are struggling financially, those that are very independent, but the systems and the strategies that are in place are not for them, or not creating a space where they can evolve and become better. Like I said, I work with women in the rural communities, so I do have exposure to some of their struggles. So especially in the agri sector, where you have, most times people, when they speak of farmers, they think of farmers as being the men, and when they are projects, and when they refer to household, even if the men and the women operate independently, when they refer to household, they always refer to men. So at the end of the day, you have the men always benefiting a little more than the women, regardless whether they're operating independent or not. So those are areas where I think, or where it should be considered in the strategies moving forward, that those areas be addressed, because some women operate independently, and when you have these women independent operators, they are more powerful. They do not really depend on the system, but yet the system have to create the avenues or the space or a friendlier environment where they can become better people. As we say, women are essential to our communities. Women are the nurturers of children. They are the ones introducing and indoctrinating the babies and the young children to life, what is normal, civilization, civic duties, responsibilities. And if environment, or if strategies and leadership do not consider the struggle of women, they will not create avenues and an environment that will allow women to propel. And therefore the way, or how we treat or train our children for the next generation, for the next, we say the future, but the future is always ongoing. It's now and tomorrow and a few months ahead, and yet women are the ones that train the children who become adults of tomorrow, who because of their morality, their standards, their beliefs, what they were taught when they were small, their foundation of the young people, of the children. That is what is brought forward as adults. So therefore, in every aspect, the struggles of women, what they're going through, how it can be improved, how it can be made better, should be seriously considered in the strategies of and in new leadership programs, or in new leaders strategy for society. Because being a leader is not just being all powerful and everything, but you have to consider all components of society. At the end of the day, whether it's a small society as a village, whether it's a community, whether it's a parish, whether it's a nation, whether it's a region, it all goes back to the foundation of our morality, of how we treat our women, what avenues we allow them to grow and develop, as well as creating a balance. What is critical is creating a balance between family, home, and working. Because with all of that struggle, with all of that encouragement, with all of that putting women in leadership, and it comes at a cost. Some of it at a cost, like the previous speaker said, some of them with their lives in their advocacy, some of them their family that they have to sacrifice, some of them their children having time to grow those children that they have into proper adults, because so much of their time is consumed with advocacy and trying to put women forward, that it comes at a cost, and the cost may vary for different people at different levels. So women on a whole, we are very sensitive, we are very critical to the community, we are very critical to the whole existence of the human being at all levels. And therefore, strategies that leaders put in place, no matter at what level, whether it's regional, national, or community, it have to consider the women as the basic fabric of our society. Because if we don't do that, if those things are not recognized, we are going to have a regress in society in terms of moral standards, how we operate, because women are the ones to introduce and indoctrinate the young ones for the next generation, the new behavior, the evolution of our whole existence. If we don't train our babies, our children, our young people, if we don't guide them, if we don't protect them, if we don't allow them to grow in a safe space, we're going to have societies that are crumbling with poor morals, gangs, guns, all the bad components of society. So in moving forward, I hope in all of that action of women and leadership and strategizing and in representation, not just women representing, but in representation of women, that in leadership, that all those strategies to embrace and enhance and create the environment for women will be considered. Hello? Hello? Hello?
We hear you. We just weren't sure that you were
Yes.
finished. You were on a fire roll.
Yeah, because the internet is fluctuating, so I'm seeing it going and coming. So I'm wondering if you all are hearing.
Yes.
Yes, go
Okay.
ahead. Go ahead.
So this is where this is where I'm at, and this is where it's at for me. When Ezra called me, she asked for somebody specific from my community, and because of the internet problems, I volunteered to do it. I volunteered to do it, and I also told her I would only have 1 hour. So I will move on now and allow somebody else to speak.
Mr. Stevenson, can we ask you a question before you go? If anyone in the audience would like to ask you a question?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Is there anyone who would like to ask her a question?
I would just like to find out what kind of work she does in the community. She works with communities, with women, and it would be enlightening to find out what actually she's doing within these communities.
Okay, hearing me?
Yes, go ahead.
Actually, I work with farmers as well as agro processors. So we are responsible for the implementation of the government programs through that district, what we call the East District. So I manage a team of 5 officers. 9 officers.
Okay, any other questions?
Hello?
I can ask a question if I have one.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, go ahead.
Yes, Sister Queen Miranda, I first and foremost want to just thank you for giving us that open-ending reminder of how important our children are and how women are to be engaged. Can you speak to some of the strengths that come from the Kalinago Nation that are things that you might need support or engagement from the wider Caribbean? Like, are you only doing this only in Dominica, or are you sharing your techniques and strategies around agriculture outside of the Caribbean, outside of Dominica? I figured
Go ahead. Go
No,
ahead.
you go ahead. That was the whole question. That's the whole question.
Right. No. I'm limited only to Dominica.
Okay, no worries. Then I'll just leave it at Mabrika. I'm good.
Yes, Mabrika. Oh, you know a few of it. No, and as it relates to the Kalinago people, well, though we've never really had a woman as the chief, because we have the chief that governs the legislation and its council that manage the Kalinago territory, because it's a lot of land in communal ownership. So each individual don't own or do not have the power of certificate of title, so they really cannot use it as securities for developmental purposes. And so our struggles are different, a small point in the whole region, but our struggles are different in that we are not able to go and negotiate for resources independently. So the government of Dominica, when looking at the development of this group of people, have to put specific strategies and programs for that minority people to be able to live a regular life like the rest of the population, so that we can integrate within the different systems for education, for finance, all of the different systems, political systems, so that if we, as indigenous people of Dominica, have to integrate within the whole system, the programs have to be specified or customized to our situation, because it's unique. We don't have certificate of titles. We operate as on communal land basis. We have high level of poverty, all the negativity that goes with minorities. It does exist within our society, and Well, in 2017, Dominica experienced Hurricane Maria, and we are still just recovering. So for some families, it's recovering of finances. For others, it's bare basic as home, because I'm still in the construction phase of my home. I, as an individual, haven't reached that level of safety. The cable companies and so on haven't come back to our communities to bring the basic internet. We have to put data, which is pretty expensive. And because we are a lot, our resources are a lot less than the rest of the wider communities, the investment in our community of the like resource like internet, telephone, TV, cable TV, and those sort of things. They don't see our community as a good market potential. So we are always last, or very, very last to get everything. So these are our struggles. A little bit of my people and our history.
Thank you for the response.
I
That was wonderful.
I cannot represent the interests of the indigenous peoples of Guyana or Belize, because their struggles might be different and their roles and function in their whole national space might be different, but I can speak to what's happening within our space, within our Kalinago community as Native people. I don't think a lot of the Caribbean realize that they are Native people in Dominica. I think they are of the opinion that it's all Afro-Caribbean people, but there's a 3,000 settlement of people, of Native American people in Dominica, and our struggle is real.
Wow, thank you so much for giving us that wonderful insight, and of course, for even, moving through the challenge of not having consistent internet. And we really appreciate you being here with us today. And again, we thank you for participating in our panel.
No problem. You're
Do you have
welcome.
any last words? Okay, thank you so much.
I'm very grateful to be part of that discussion. So far it is educational to me. I like the presentation of the first speaker. I like the way that you went back and brought it to current. And
again, thank you again for sharing your experience and the experiences of your community and the work that you're doing in Dominica.
Yes, thank you, and you're welcome.
Well, I believe we have come to the end of this wonderful session. Let me turn on my camera for a second. I'm trying to maintain the internet system. Yes. So we have come to the end of this wonderful session this evening. We've heard from 3 voices from the region. We've heard from Dominica, we've heard from the Virgin Islands, and we've heard from Haiti. This, as we said in the beginning, is the first of many that we're going to be doing. And I want us to remember a few things as we are leaving. Leadership is something that women have been doing and are continuing to do. And there are in many cases, the unseen voices or the unseen forces behind what's being done. Strategy, we were told that we need to look for our decolonized template to use and use that template as we combat the many systemic, I would say, transgressions that have occurred and that continue to occur. Power is within us, it's in our cosmic spaces, and we need to draw from our ancestors as we move forward. And representation, when we do have an opportunity to be at the seat, we really speak up for those who are in need and not use our seats because as placeholders. So I really do want to thank our 3 panelists this evening. Sister Stephenson from Dominica, Dr. Chenzira from the Virgin Islands, and Sister Dantò from Haiti. We really appreciate your insights. They were very impactful. I've learned a lot. I hope that our audience as well were able to learn and engage, and hopefully, as Sister Chenzira says, that we don't use this space as I would say, a safe space for your secrets, but we actually empower others in our communities and actually do the work. And again, I want to thank my team from the Current Progressive Perspectives. We want to thank you all for your diligence for putting this on together. And I do hope that you have a pleasant evening further. I think everybody has said what they have to say. If not, I'll give you 2 seconds to say so. So do our panelists want to say 2 last words before they leave? Or are they fine?
Much thanks to everyone.
I think everyone has said what they had to say. All hearts and minds are clear. Enjoy the rest of the evening and look forward to more discussion.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Be safe.
And in the chat room, you can see the link to the Facebook page where you can see the recording of this event. Thanks again.
Thank
Thank you.